I said, be mindful that whatever your child came in or whatever you brought them in for, that's not the only thing they're dealing with. A lot of clients are dealing with co-occurring issues. So, yes, you might think they're coming in dealing with behavioral issues, but it could be because of stress, lack of sleep, lack of self-confidence. So, we're seeing that this is the image of their problems, but it's like what's underneath that.
Hi, I'm Lydia Thompson, and I'm the host of Counselor Off the Clock. This episode, I will continue with Kimberley Proctor-White, a counselor who works with me at Concord Family Counseling. If you didn't hear the last episode, check it out. We talked about life balance. On this episode, we're talking about parental involvement in therapy, the do's and don'ts. If you don't have a child, that's okay. We can still keep you company and you might learn a little something. The first part of this episode you should enjoy. We talk about our teenage selves, which Kimberley has quite the story. If you are loving this podcast, like and subscribe. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Counselor Off the Clock. I hope you can get comfortable because we are off the clock.
Yeah, so I'm Kimberly, as she said. Been Kimberly my whole life. And so.
Not Kim?
No, well, only to certain people, yes.
Kimbo?
Yeah, no, not Kimbo. No. Kimmy, I've been Beverly, Sharon. I don't know where they got that from, but, whatever. But yeah, so I got into this work just because of mainly really trying to think of my own journey in life and try to create opportunities for people to have that outlet, that support that maybe I lacked at different stages in life, but then also for those who may be older, to kind of relearn some things and to give themselves permission to kind of go back and change the narrative. And so with most of my clients that I see, they are school age. So my youngest in general has been 6, but my youngest right now is around 10, 11 years old. And I'm finding that with many of them, they're dealing with like anxiety. And so I have some experience of working with children and adolescents in anxiety and OCD, as well as navigating peer relationships, it's hard, being in school and not only trying to figure out who you are, but trying to meet these expectations of your friends or the adults in your life. So anxiety comes up quite a bit, as well as just like finding ways to deal with stress. These are things that a lot of children and adolescents do not have the skills to learn. So that's why it's helpful for adults in their lives, especially because we've been kids. It's helpful for the adults in their lives to be a part of that.
I like to think about what I was like as a kid and a teenager, just even to relate to my clients and be empathetic. Tell me a little bit about, you were in chat rooms at the library and
right.
Tell me a little bit about like who you were and what your process of becoming Kimberly was through, elementary, middle, and high, wherever you want to talk about.
Yeah. That's not a question I get asked all the time, but I think about it, especially, being a parent and then also working with younger clients because, sometimes the expectations that we have of younger clients, we have to realize, well, I didn't really think about it like that when I was their age, you know? And I think sometimes that makes parents kind of out of the loop because they forget that they were in their position at one point, and
Absolutely.
so they have these unrealistic expectations of where they are developmentally and cognitively, and so they're kind of like expecting them to respond in the way that they did probably when they were in their 20s and 30s or whatever, and it's like, no, let's dial it back a little bit. So the teenage version of me, yeah, she was interesting. She was definitely a daredevil. Living on the edge of danger. always very social, and never really had any issues, with people at school. I had a fairly good amount of friends that I would be with. Most of us, we were into like whatever girl group was happening at the time. So like In Vogue and a lot of the like R&B hip hop groups at the time. And so we would like get ready for talent shows and say, okay, we're going to sing this song. And then we went to like whatever store was popular at that time, which I think was like a Roses. If you guys know about Roses, it's a great store. But they really don't have a lot of those these days. But it was like a watered down version of Sears, and which most people don't have that anymore either. But but yeah, so we would go and we would get like matching outfits, and do choreography, and would say, so you're going to be the lead, and then you're going to come in and sing this. So the teenage version of me was always about like dancing and singing and doing the like creative art stuff because I'm a singer and actress. So we were doing that and creating plays and making our own dollhouses and things like that from catalogs, Sears catalog and JCPenney catalog books. So as I got older, just kind of focusing on the academics and what I wanted to do and knowing I was going to go to college. So I was very good academically, so yeah, I mean, I felt like I was pretty well-rounded and had friends in all places and spaces. So yeah.
Yeah. How do you see yourself as differing from your teenage self?
Definitely probably taking more time to think about things before I do it, and what the consequences could be. And I know that is a developmental thing. When you study lifespan development, you know that there are just certain things that will not happen until certain ages. And decision making is hard when you're young because you only think of what's happening in the moment. You don't think of long term. You don't think of how it impacts other people.
Can you give us an example of what that looked like?
Of like a bad decision I made?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So
if
there was this one
to.
time I was on top of a car. Let's start there.
On top of a car?
Yeah. So I have no clue what made me want to do it. But if you could imagine any movie that you've ever seen where you would see people like drag racing and somebody would be standing on top of a car. We weren't drag racing. It was one car. That's it. So I don't know why we were doing it, but my friend was driving. That was probably a bad idea. You have a teenage driver driving a car. Okay. And I was on top of like the hood, and where I lived at the time, it was like a hill to get up to the house, and then she was getting ready to turn into the driveway, and she turned a little too hard, and so I fell off the car and landed on my arm, elbow, shoulder, that whole connecting thing. And I think I was so embarrassed. It took me probably until later that evening to tell my mom that my arm felt like it was broken. And I mean, because I was more worried about getting in trouble.
Right.
But it was like I couldn't like stand the pain. So I ended up having to tell her, and of course hear like, what were you doing? Why would you do that? And we ended up at the ER, and it wasn't broken, but I did have to wear a sling for a little bit. Wow. So yeah, kind of things like that, or like when kids go through that stage of they're wanting to shave their hair. And so
you shaved your hair?
Well, not all of it, but just like a section. And
which section?
It was like, I don't know, like
the side?
Yeah, it was like the side, and it was not like trying to imitate a particular style. It was just really
impulsive.
Yeah. And again, I didn't feel as bad knowing that this is a rite of passage. So just so that you know, it is a rite of passage for most kids that they will cut their hair at some point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So so stuff like that, trying to make decisions and knowing how it can impact you or impact other people. I was not there.
Yeah, I didn't have the awareness yet.
Not at all.
Worth it,
Yeah.
Being on top of a car?
I can't say it was worth it, but I think it was like what any young person is going to think. It's like, let me see what happens. Let me see if I'm invincible. Let me see if I go down this hill on my bike, no hands, handlebars. I mean, like the brakes don't work half the time. I had bikes like that, and the brakes didn't work, and we would go down a hill and be like, well, the gravel will stop us or something, if not a car first.
Gravel will stop us.
So
yeah, I mean, we'll figure it all together.
Living on the wild side.
Wow.
But I think that's the fun things that we miss about childhood, not the dangerous part, but I mean, just that sense of feeling like I can do anything. And just really being risk takers. Again, I would never promote people doing things that are unsafe, but those are the things that we lose as we get older because there's an expectation that you can't have fun and you can't be creative and you can't just kind of step out on faith. It's more or less, if we're going to do something, we have to have a definitive answer of how it's going to happen from A to Z. And that's the part that we lose as we get older.
Yeah, wow. So there's like still a piece of you that is that person. Mm-hmm. And yet you've maybe gotten a little bit wiser.
Yeah.
And developmentally, it makes sense. I know it's easy to think back to my teenage self and be like, yeah, she was dumb. She was like really not smart. And why did she do those things?
Yeah.
And I was like, a couple episodes on the podcast, when we were recording with Michelle, I was sharing some of the Facebook statuses that I posted and back in the day. I'm like, who was that girl?
Yeah.
Why did she post that?
Almost like talking about strangers sometimes.
It almost feels like that. And so being able to say, like, this was the person I was, and this person is still a part of me. I've grown up. I'm grown. More grown.
Yeah. Groaner.
Groaner. But I think definitely even working with teenage clients, I'm like, oh, gosh.
Yeah.
I'm having memories of what drove me. I think what drove me a lot of times was approval from others. I just cringe about, like, what I did for others' approval and how much I didn't listen to my own voice.
Right.
Like you, I was a performer. So I did theater and I did speech and I was really good at it. And so, as much as I think being a performer was a really great outlet for my creativity and finding myself and my voice, what I thought was funny and what I thought was good, it seemed like it was always filtered through what adults and my peers thought was good.
Yeah.
And I think what some of the work that has been done integrating my teenage self is, how do I listen to my own voice? This person that is me, valued others' voices, which is great, but how do I also value my own voice?
Yeah. And also kind of like giving yourself grace and self-compassion in a way that maybe you didn't then. And so when I hear like my teenage clients and they can be really hard on themselves and they have these expectations either that they kind of created on their own or came from somewhere else. And so I'm like, well, I don't want to keep telling you probably the same thing your parents are. It's like, oh, you'll grow out. Like, I don't feel like that's fair, because many of us may not have had a person to really listen to us at that age,
Yes.
So it was dismissed a lot, and made us feel like you don't have a right to speak on something because in their minds, they're like, you're going to grow out of it or just keep living. So I do try to create that space where they can talk freely about it because I didn't have that, as well as still trying to encourage them that things will get better, and you could be a part of it getting better. But part of that is like giving yourself grace and compassion that you're going to make mistakes.
Totally.
And you have to do things for you, not for someone else, especially for like these friends that you probably will never see again, but again, I don't want to seem like that, person that's saying what they probably hear all the time, but there is a lot of truth in that,
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and I think there is a lot of like, oh, precious Lydia, if you only knew. Now you didn't, and it was a part of the growth process, but oh, sweet Lydia, And I think that is the beauty of the work that we get to do for our clients is, what if I had that space? I mean, not to rewrite history, but what if I had that space when I was a teenager?
Yeah.
What could have happened? What trajectory would that have taken me on? I don't know. But I get to do that for other people and other teenagers, is be there for them. Again, not that I was like a really bad kid or struggling so much, but just to have an adult, not my parents, care about me so deeply and give me a non-judgmental space to process things, game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you kind of realize, thinking of the what ifs, then it is like, yeah, I probably would have made better decisions even later on in life. Because again, it goes back to whatever skills we do or don't have at a certain age, it can impact us later on. And so thinking of college and young adulthood and, being out and making relationships with people, there were things that I was like, I wish I had learned that, or really felt empowered to have a say-so on the kind of relationships that I wanted. And I really do try to encourage that in my teen clients. It's like, you can decide who you want to hang around with, but unfortunately many of them are dealing with low self-esteem and really trying to have the acceptance and approval of other people, that they're like, well, yeah, these friends treat me like trash, but it's better to be with them than to be alone. And that's so disheartening when I hear that, because I'm like, but you're so much better than that. You deserve so much more. But again, at that age, I wouldn't have known that I had that option.
No. Yeah. And that's the difficult part, is like what we went through as teenagers. Teenagers are the same. Like what your parents, what your grandparents, adolescence hasn't changed much. Now that's a big topic of, teens aren't the same. And, technology definitely has changed certain things. But it's the same content. It's the same process over and over again. So the things, I think that's a really key part of having empathy for kiddos and teenagers is, what was I like? What did I struggle with? Oh, they're just struggling with similar things.
Absolutely. It's like, if you think of, a famous play, that play has different characters, but the story is still the same, and I think that's where people can give that compassion towards others, whether they're younger than them, or they're from a different background, or don't have the same opportunities. It's like, our stories can be very similar, even though how we interpret it and how it's impacting us might look a little different. But again,
Yeah, I know. Listening to my clients, I'm like, don't make the decision. It's almost like you're watching, the character walk through the door, right? You're like, don't walk in. Don't do it.
You're right. The suspense music starts playing.
But we know how it goes.
Right.
We know, we know that that's the case a lot of times. And so, but it's like, don't do it. Don't make that decision. Don't feel that way about yourself. But it, plays out the same.
Right. I think what helps me through those moments, because again, you want to jump in and say, oh no, don't do that. You know, like you want to tell them what to do and not do, but it's like,
absolutely,
obviously part of life is that we have to, unfortunately, have those moments where we fall, and we have to learn things in a much harder way than maybe we could have. We could have avoided a lot of things, but life is a great teacher. And I think there are a lot of times when that happens, then I remind myself that they're going to get it. And I always tell them, I'll say, you know what, if you think of me in like 20, 30 years, I want you to find me, Google me, and I want you to send me an email and say, Kimberly, that one thing that you said that I rolled my eyes at and I thought was complete bananas, it rang true today. Yeah. And sometimes that's when it happens. It's like when you think of a thought at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, like, where did that come from? It starts to make sense at some point. So right now it doesn't make sense. But that's when you can remind yourself as a clinician that you are planting seeds or watering seeds that have already been planted. And at one point, hopefully, they will start to make sense of it.
Yeah. So much of that has happened becoming older and then becoming a mom. People would say certain things like, the years are short, the days are long, and I'm like, okay, and life goes by so fast.
Right.
Okay, cherish every moment.
That's exactly
I'm
how
just
they
like,
do it.
okay, you guys are annoying.
Yeah.
But now that I'm here living it, I'm like, cherish every moment.
Right. Yeah.
The days are long, the years are short. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
I find myself saying those things to myself, and it rings true for me now that I've have lived experience.
Yeah. And I think even sometimes when you say that, like, I resonate with that because, like, sometimes I want to say that to my teen clients or even my younger ones and be like, oh, it can get better, you know, like, enjoy not having bills and not having to adult, you know. But at the same time, I try to put myself in their shoes, and we all were like, I can't wait to grow up and be able to do things on my own and have my own money and make my own decisions. So we all have been there. And again, we kind of forget that is just like that sense of urgency, like, I need to get there. And then when you get there, it's not as glamorous at times as you thought it would be. So I'm like, yeah, they're going through that process of trying to get out of the chapter of life that they're in because they think what's next is better than what is. And for some of it is. For some of them, it does lead to better things because maybe they're in a really rough chapter of their life, and they're like, the sooner I can get out of this, the better off I'll be. And I do think that's true for a lot of people.
So, yeah, Kimberly and I both see teenagers and preteens, and so this is a complex topic of parental involvement because what the research shows is parental involvement is key in making long-lasting change in children and adolescents' lives. We get to see them for 50 minutes a week, but parents and caregivers are in their kids' lives all day, every day. They get to be connected to them all the time. And so it can really be make or break for a lot of kids.
I'm finding that there are a lot of parents and caregivers who are very involved in their children's journey. And then I find some that you never hear from them beyond that initial phone call. Or you hear from them when everything is on fire and we need to call 911 and we're in panic mode, you know. Everything's hit the fan. So that is where we are. You have some who are and then some who aren't involved.
Yeah. So tell me about, I guess you're categorizing them as like uninvolved, call me when everything's on fire, and then super involved. Can you talk me through like a few situations in which parent involvement might be needed and beneficial?
Yeah. So the main thing is, you know, I think when clients come in at any age, it doesn't matter who they are, sometimes they forget that the real work happens outside of session, right? They're kind of like, oh, you tell me everything I need to know, and it's going to be an overnight fix. And I have to tell my clients, I'm not a magic fairy. I cannot wave a wand over you and make everything go away or better. So they have this expectation that you're to come in. The clients or the parents.
Right.
Or the adults, whomever. But yeah, they have this expectation that you're to come in and to fix the situation. But the clients and the parents, don't always realize that they have to put in the work as well. And so what I'm finding is when we have these sessions and I'm giving tools and resources and, you know, we're revisiting past conversations, especially if I see that either the client is growing and I will say, hey, do you remember when you used to say this or when this was your thought process and now you're kind of looking at it from a different perspective? I love that. But then on the flip side, we have some that you don't see that progression because there's not that work that's happening outside of it. Because again, I don't think that they realize how involved they need to be. Maybe there's this idea that because I'm coming to you, you are the one that's to make things better, but not empowering themselves of how do you play a role in your development? How do you play a role in the setback? Because you play a role in either one, sometimes both at the same time. Like, today we can be moving forward, and then the next day we could be taking steps backwards. So it's about learning what role you play.
Yeah. So, putting your kid in therapy can be really amazing. And the work happens outside of here.
Yep.
I usually relate the metaphor of going to the gym. Is it's great to go to the gym, right? And we get to be in here, and the therapy room is our gym, and we're lifting heavy, and we're training hard. And if you sit on your tush the rest of the time, are your muscles going to grow? Yes. Are they going to grow very slowly, or maybe not at all? Yeah. And so doing the work outside of this metaphorical gym is what's going to help you be strong. And so parental involvement can help with the outside work. Yeah. So if a parent wants to be a part, what does that process look like? They're like, oh, yes, I do. I want to be a part. I want to be helpful. Okay, what might that look like?
So I want to go back to you talking about the gym analogy.
Yeah,
so
please do.
I will speak my truth in that I know sometimes when I've been exercising, I do running. So I sign up for like 5Ks and stuff, and I've done like half marathons. So these are things that you have to train in advance and long and hard for. Okay. I find that when I take too much time off, it's harder for me to get back into the swing of things. It's not only hard mentally, but physically to kind of get back to that level of momentum. I'm finding the same thing happening in therapy. Unfortunately, when either there's too much of a gap in time between sessions or there is no work happening outside of the session, then when you do come back together, it's hard to get back into the mindset of we're working towards goals, we're trying to improve some things, or we're trying to let go of some things that aren't helpful. So it's the same with parents. They might be really into it at the beginning because they're like, we're in crisis mode, or even when they're not in crisis, they're seeing something is broken or something needs to be better. And so maybe in the beginning, their intentions are great. But then they might get a little too comfortable with you because it's like, oh, I know they're in good hands, and I know you guys are doing great work, So they kind of back off a little bit. And that's great. I love that you trust me. Yeah. But I also want you to check in because there's only so much I can share with you because of the confidentiality thing. So I'm always encouraging my clients, like, hey, tell your parents like what you're working, what you're learning, or even when I do a check-in, I'll give like a basic overview to say we're learning stress management. I might not go into detail that you're the reason they're stressed out, mom and dad. But I'll just say we're learning stress management and how to be assertive in our communication. But the child can then tell you, Mom, Dad, you're the one who's stressing me out, and I don't know how to communicate with you. So I think parents can be involved by trying to be consistent. And also, if they're not sure, like, what should I be looking for? Like, how do I know that they're improving or whatever? Because they might be looking for outward things, behavioral changes is what they're typically looking for. But maybe part of that process is understanding that the behavior doesn't change until the mindset changes. And so I can't change anything that I'm doing until I realize that there's a better way to do it, or maybe I need to explore other options. That's the mental part of it. So they're looking for the outward stuff when maybe all the work so far has been the internal stuff. So yeah.
So involvement is really being in touch with what is going on with your kid, and then learning how to support them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your kid is a part of a system, and I think often what we see is kids are the symptom bearers. And so to get help for their kid means that stuff might come up about the family system, about your marriage, about your parenting skills, and to be open that it might not be just your kid's problem. No, it might be. Goodness gracious. Yeah, I mean, we've seen, an anxiety disorder or something that just comes out of nowhere. We talk to the parents. It just is not connected, but to be open that there are different ways to be with your child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In order to help them outside of our offices.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, I think it's important to understand that even when you're talking about, like, okay, it may not just be your child, it could involve other people in the family. You know, one thing that I'm constantly reminding parents is that you might have to do your own work.
Oof.
Now,
all right, tell me about that.
I think I've only had like a few, and if I was to put a number on it, so let's say if I was to talk with 10 parents, I might have one or two that will respond back to say, you know, yes, I do know that I need this. Or even when we first meet, they might say, I'm bringing my child for this, and I know it's because I'm also dealing with this, and I also need to be be with a therapist. But I think for them, they see the urgency more in their child, but not in them. And so I really don't have a lot of feedback from parents, but when I'm talking with them, and it's not to judge anything that they're doing or going through, but when their child is telling me that their parents are also struggling with things, again, confidentiality, but in my mind, I'm like, yeah, you need to do your own work as well. So I find a way to apply to all parents, you know, not to single any of them out, but to just say, hey, your child's working on this, but it's hard. And this is what I tell my clients. It's really hard for you to be doing your work and then you go back home and everything's still the same. You know, I learned that at a women's retreat I went to years ago, that you've had this life-changing encounter. You're coming back excited about the next step, the next chapter in your life, but everybody else around you is just moving and shaking like they've always been. So how do you keep that excitement? How do you keep motivated, you know, for doing what you want to do when the world around you is still the same? And it's the exact same in therapy. You know, they're doing a lot of great work in sessions, but they have nowhere to apply it to at home because it's not being supported or they're not seeing examples of it.
Yeah, and I think this is, you know, I've used this before. There's like what you know. There's what you know you don't know. And there's what you don't know you don't know. And I think often parents fall into this, they don't know that they don't know this.
Right.
That they are operating under, I'm doing the best for my family, I'm doing the best for my kid. And part of coming to therapy and doing your own work is uncovering what you don't know you don't know. How are you contributing to the issues that your child is dealing with? And it might actually come as a surprise to you.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard, you know, because you don't want them to think that you're attacking them or, you know, making them the dartboard for everything that their child is going through. But
yeah,
I think it's a great way to look at it from this perspective. So again, you might not be the sole reason that this child is dealing with anxiety or low self-esteem. You might be very loving and, you know, attentive to see that your child was struggling. So that's what led you here. You know, you was like, I see that something is happening and I want them to be supported. But even with that, even if you're not the root cause of it, it would be worth asking, you know, have I always allowed space for them to talk about what's happening? You're not the reason for the problem, but you never allowed me to talk about it, you know, or you did allow me to talk about it, but then you were always the fixer. You didn't let me try to figure it out on my own. Now, some parent would be like, well, why is that a bad thing? You know, and in theory, it's not bad when you can be that source of encouragement and that safe space for a child, but it doesn't allow them to kind of make decisions on their own. And so you're not there when they're at school. They talk to you about these problems when they're at home, but when they're in school, if they don't have, or on the field, you know, doing an extracurricular or a sport, you're not physically there with them to say, this is what you do in this situation. This is how you talk to that person. This is how you handle that. So if you don't give them the skills and the tools necessary when you're not present, then there's always that lack of confidence in themselves that I can only be successful because mom and dad has all the answers. Yeah. But mom and dad are not at school. Mom and dad are not at work when you are doing your after school job or whatever, you know.
I can already hear the like, I can't win as a parent, right? I
Mm-hmm.
can't win.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not there all the time. Even when I'm encouraging, you know, it messes them up in some way. I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think if you get comfy with, I have contributed to my child's problems, if you can get comfy with that and not judge that, I think it allows growth to happen and openness. And I think openness is, and flexibility is one of the best things I can see in a parent when I am working with their child.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I encourage parents, if they really don't know what's going on, ask for feedback. Ask for feedback from your teenagers. They'll tell you.
Yeah.
They'll tell you. And sometimes it's not what about what you do, and sometimes it's about the absence of something. And that's a lot harder to identify, as self-aware as you might be. So asking for that feedback, what could I be doing better? How do I make you more anxious? How do I stress you out? And some of this is like, well, you make me do chores. Well, yeah, okay.
Right.
Like, that's just natural. That's just normal. That's a stressor. Sorry about it.
Yeah. Or even, again, how is it that I'm contributing to your lack of self-confidence? You know, because, again, if I'm coming in to rescue you all the time, then you're going to doubt your own abilities. And again, I'm helping you, but I'm not being helpful. So again, it does seem like a no-win situation. And that's why I said it's not just parents who aren't doing something. It's even the ones who are very proactive. And I try to affirm parents when they're proactive. I'm like, I'm really, you know, proud that you're doing this. You're asking these questions. You check in, you know, even if nothing specific has happened, you're just saying, hey, I just want you to know I'm seeing these changes, these positive changes at home. And I just wanted you to be aware of that. Like, we love that, you know?
Because we're not there.
Right. We have no clue what's happening outside of the office unless, again, you get those text messages or the emails that, like, this has been a tough week and, you know, we're in panic mode. That's when we know that something is not working. But we love to hear when things are going well. Or I've had a parent to say, well, we're still having issues with this, but I see that they're making more of an effort. You know, so it's like highlighting the positive, even though the not so good parts have not completely gotten better. So we appreciate that as well. Like, you're seeing something, but you're still in the trenches.
Yeah, so on one side of the spectrum is we want parents to be involved, checking in, doing the work, being open, doing their own work, being open to feedback, right? And I think that's on one side of the spectrum, and I think the other side of the spectrum is over-involvement. So what does that look like in the work that you do?
Over-involvement.
Do you get that?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like if it was happening with a lot of them, I would easily be able to be like, oh, yeah, I can see that.
I'll share a little bit if you want
please,
me to.
Yeah, start with you, because then maybe that'll be like, oh, yeah, I do have a parent that does that.
Yeah, so when I am working with all ages, I really like parent involvement. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. When we start to get to like 15, 16, 17, I really like to protect this space as their own. So occasionally I will get parents who want to know a lot about what's going on in here.
Right.
And really, they can email me things outside of session that I'm like, you know, your 17-year-old could have told me. But they want to be the ones to inform me. And I know that parents are really trying to be helpful. And I'm not sure where this comes from. I mean, I have some ideas. But they sometimes try to control the narrative in here. And like want notes after every session, want to know what they're talking about, what they're working on, and then when we have maybe sessions together, they take up a lot of space in the session, and so I sometimes will see that as this is a red flag for me or a yellow flag for me that you need to do your own work. A lot of it is I feel like coming from, I need help too. And I need help too. And so this can be also a sign that parents need their own counselor to give them ideas. Yeah. So do you ever see that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple came to mind, whether it's past clients or even, current ones. But I think the interesting part of it is like when I'm being asked questions, I don't know if they already are kind of jumping ahead and saying, okay, well, again, when's the fixing happening? And because the process is hard, any client that comes in, they're, as much as they may not like the situation that they're in, and it's uncomfortable and it's, a struggle, whatever it may be, whatever emotions that come up, a lot of them don't know that the process can be long. It's that overnight microwave society that we're in. We need things to happen quickly.
I get it, right? And sometimes when people call, it is the house is on fire. It's an emergency.
Yeah.
We need to get it immediately, and we need this fixed as soon as possible. And I get the urgency. And the work that we do is slow and difficult.
Right. And I think
for
that's
a lot of
where,
clients.
Yeah, and I think that's where the questions come in of, well, if I brought them in for this particular thing, when will I see results? And, maybe even going back to the physical analogy that you use, sometimes people are like, well, how long is it going to take me to lose this weight? How long is it going to take me to build muscle? Well, I see it in 6 weeks, And when I was an intern, we had a program that the clients were expected to be in that program for like 8 to 12 weeks, something like that. So I don't think the approach was to say in 8 to 12 weeks, this person will be completely absolved of what's happening. But I think there was like concrete time frame for them to say in 8 to 12 weeks, we should be better. And there's some, I think that can be helpful just to say at least that, hopefully within a certain time frame we can see some improvement. Absolutely. But I think that clients and parents do come in with this expectation that I need to see results in a certain amount of time. They may not know what that time frame is. Theirs is just like sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So the process is long. It's hard. And the questions that I get asked is, well, have they said anything about this particular thing? Because it might have been whatever they came in for. And then that's when I have to have a conversation. And I recently had this conversation with all the parents in an email. I said, be mindful that whatever your child came in or whatever you brought them in for, that's not the only thing they're dealing with. A lot of clients are dealing with co-occurring issues. So yes, you might think they're coming in dealing with behavioral issues, but it could be because of stress, lack of sleep, lack of self-confidence. So we're seeing that this is the image of their problems, but it's like what's underneath that, and I think they forget that, so you're not just coming in with anxiety. What is that? What started that, and that could have been an experience, or it could have been a conversation you heard. And then that led to this big, massive face of anxiety that we see. But you have to peel back those layers to figure out what got us to this point. And it's not just what you put on the intake form. Yeah. It's not just that one category. Many of them are dealing with multiple categories. And so that's what I'm dealing with sometimes with parents,
Yeah, I think that's uncomfortable for parents to go, I don't know fully what my child is dealing with. And I trust that they're sharing that with a trusted adult when you put them in therapy.
You can say that louder. You don't have to.
When they put them in therapy.
When you put them in therapy.
When you put them in therapy, you just, a lot of parents don't know fully their children. And that's okay, especially with adolescents. That's totally developmentally normal. Yeah. To not know. So setting your expectations that it's going to take a little bit. I mean, let's go back to the analogy. We love the analogy. Can you get more fit in 8 to 12 weeks? Yes. Or 8 to 12 sessions even. Yes. if you come to session once a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only work that you do,
Mm-hmm.
what are the results going to be in 8 sessions?
Right.
It's going to be something.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to be better than,
Nothing.
sitting on the couch, better than nothing.
Right.
But parental involvement is really key in doing the work outside of session so that, gosh, in 8 weeks, we're actually seeing some real tangible results.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling the strength. I'm feeling the muscles, right? I'm feeling stronger and more resilient, and my energy has gone up. But it takes doing work outside of session, and that is where parental involvement is so important.
Yeah.
So being involved in your kids' therapy sessions requires humility and openness, being open to feedback and being willing to change the system so that your child can also change.
Yeah. And it also requires setting priorities.
Talk more about that.
Again, I feel like I have this conversation quite a bit, you know, that you have to kind of like how we as clinicians or whatever field someone's in, you are invited to remember your why. Like, why did I get into this? What impact did I think I could make? And so it's great for parents to also remember their why. Why did you reach out to us in the first place?
Yeah.
What was happening that you felt like, okay, either we've tried everything we could, or maybe they didn't know what to do. So they was just kind of like, okay, let me pass it on to someone else who may have a little bit. And that's okay. I mean, at least you did something, and we want to celebrate that because, again, anytime a parent is proactive, I'm always going to celebrate you, because you could be like, we're going to just sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to affirm a parent that you made the phone call, you filled out the paperwork, and you got them here.
Yes.
Because that's important, and they may not know that was significant to at least get the ball rolling. But you have to remember what brought you here in the first place, and then set some priorities. Because my school age clients are involved in academics and extracurriculars and all these other things, there's a lot of things competing for their time and attention. And I always want young clients or even older clients to have those outlets, especially when they're not finding joy in things, or they're feeling sadness or depression, or they're lacking in social relationships. I always encourage them to find things that they can do that gives them those outlets, that gives them something to look forward to. But the thing that I'm finding is that sometimes those take priority over the reason that brought you here in the first place. But then when you start to talk to them, it's like, well, that's why they're dealing with things. It's because they're overwhelmed, or they're overscheduled. You know, they don't have a moment to breathe, you know, so having to go and evaluate your calendar and stuff like that.
Wow. Yeah, so parents can be helpful in...
I'm going to drink some water real quick.
Please drink water. Take care of yourself. So parents can be involved in making therapy a priority. This is not just another activity. This is not just another doctor's appointment. This is, if we want improvement, and quick improvement, and significant and lasting improvement, we've got to make this a priority. You got to get your kid here, and make space for growth.
Absolutely. And I think I read it in an article or something, and it really stuck with me, and I've been using it quite a bit. So that's how I know it was significant, because I'm referring to it all the time. But I read something that says, you know, I can't treat empty couches. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, you know.
What do you mean?
So,
Maybe I'm lost.
Right. So either empty couches, empty seats. Like, I can't do anything when you're not here. Okay. And so, yes, if you have somebody who can't drive themselves here, we're missing appointments, or our appointments are so spaced out, and we're having to like start all over, or not even start over, but we're having to kind of catch up.
Oh, yeah.
And we're using a great majority of the session to catch up from however long it's been. You know, it's hard to see those signs of improvement, you know, and so I have been telling people, you know, I can't make improvements for this child or to try to make improvements in your family if you're not here. I can't tell that empty chair that, hey, you can have the tools to do this and that, because there's no feedback, there's no interaction.
Yeah.
Wherever I read that, it just really resonated to me. Like, yeah, I cannot treat empty seats, empty couches, whatever.
Yeah, you gotta show up.
You have to be here.
And supporting your child and teen outside of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we have just like kept people company, right? And part of that is like my vision of this podcast is just, hey, while we're growing, let's just be a little bit less alone. Yes, we'll get some ideas. Yes, but exactly what you're saying, growth takes time and it's difficult and there is no quick fix.
Yep.
So if they've zoned out the whole time, what's one thing they can take away from this conversation?
I would say, because we've talked about like things taking time, and I don't like to use the phrase trust the process. I feel like it's overdone a little too much, especially, even in my own academic studies. But I would just say, take it one day at a time, and that's just with anything, life or decision making or trying to make something better is, whatever you envision your child, your family, yourself looking like, a better version of that. It takes time. And you can't jump from where you are to where you want to be. You have to go down that path of healing and self-awareness and doing the hard work before you can get to the good stuff. So that is the main takeaway, is just take it one day at a time. Whatever efforts you're making daily to get to where you want to be or to help your child get to where they want to be. Yeah. That it's worth at least moving, Yeah.
Yeah. You said it amazingly better than I could have said it.
Well, thank you. I wasn't sure, but yeah.
You did it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, listener, for joining us on another episode of Counselor Off the Clock. Like, subscribe. I don't know, do all the things. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you think about this episode. Any questions that you have. These are really nuanced topics. And we're getting into the weeds, and we could talk about this specific topic for 8 hours. Truly, I could sit here and talk about each situation and nuance. We don't have time for that. So what questions do you have based off of our conversation today? We would love to hear from you and what you want to hear us talk about. Until next time, thank you. I'm Lydia Thompson. Counselor of the God.
Awesome.
We're in the zone.
Right, exactly.
Podcast zone.
I love it.